There are two kinds of people in this world: the people who fail to do what they know they should, and those who keep doing things they know they shouldn't. Guess what? You're both. Hi, I'm your podcast host and life and business coach, Marcy Barker, aka your loving kick in the pants. In this podcast, I'll teach you the 6 steps of my accountability code framework that will enable you to wake up with clarity and show up with aligned action steps that make follow through easy and peaceful. When you're ready for more, head to marcybarker.com and we'll chat about your next goal. All right, let's dive in. Hello, my beautiful people. Today's episode is going to be amazing because I'm here with one of my new clients, Becky, Nieves, and we're going to talk about some hard stuff. And Becky this, but one of my most popular podcast episodes is with my sister when we talk about how we grew up and the traumatic things that we went through. So I'm going to start us off by reading Becky's bio so that all of you listeners can get an idea of what we're going to chat about today. And it's going to be a good one. So here we go. Becky Nieves is a cycle-breaking empowerment coach who helps moms break free from toxic family dynamics, go no contact with unsupportive parents, and reparent themselves. With a no-nonsense approach and a passion for helping women reclaim their peace and identity, Becky guides her clients to set boundaries, overcome guilt, and build a healthier legacy for their children. She's all about empowerment, freedom, and transforming generational patterns because choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Woo, that is good. That is so good. Okay, so Becky, tell me, should we just dive right into the deep stuff, or how do you normally bring this topic up when somebody's like, what do you do?
Yeah, no, I usually start by sharing my own story. So I'm all about going right into the nitty gritty. They're like, well, why would you want to do that? Because it's so taboo. I'm like, I haven't talked to my dad in 6 years. And they're like, whoa, how did you do that? So that's generally how I segue and just dive right in.
Yeah. In one of my business groups, I had expressed gratitude for people who had supported me because my parents just separated after 40 years. And somebody came up to me after the meeting and said, he's your dad. Give him a hug. It'll be fine. And I was like, I thought really mean things in my head. I just was like, you don't understand. I just don't get it how people can just pretend it's fine and it'll be fine. And it's like, no, you have not dealt with the level of abuse that we have. So start us off then. Where did your story start? When did you recognize you were in a situation that you were like, this is actually bad?
Yeah, no, so it's really funny. And so my dad, I always say, he's a narcissist, textbook wise, and my mom was an enabler. And I think when I started, we didn't really go over other people's houses too much because that was part of my father's whole narcissism and control thing. But I would say around the age 10, like making friends in school, you start to realize, like, wait, this doesn't happen at your house. Like, that's not normal. And then when I was 14, I decided what I was going to do with the rest of my life. I was going to go to college, get a psychology degree because I was like, something is wrong with my family and I need to figure it out.
Oh, wow.
And that's like literally like everybody's like, well, why psychology? Like, because people who generally meet me, they're like, you have some serious RBF. Like, why would you want to work with people? And I'm like, no, but people really do fascinate me. So that was my whole motivation for that, just to figure out what was wrong with my family. I did get the degree, by the way. Um,
Yay.
I,
Congrats.
I did. I did get a bachelor's degree in psychology, and then I was like, yeah, my family is pretty effed up. So I went through, oh my God, like 2 decades of back and forth. Like we would kind of not speak for a few months, and then I'd go back and I'd try to work it out. For me, I can literally remember like, the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back or whatever. Um, my daughter has a rare disease called Hermansky-Pudlak syndrome. She's cool now, but later on in life, she's going to develop pulmonary fibrosis, which is a hardening and scarring of the lungs. So we have to do everything that we can so that her lungs stay relatively healthy. Both of my parents are smokers. And, it was always the constant, well, why can't I just go outside and have a cigarette? And I'm like, you don't understand. Like, this can possibly kill my child, and I have to do everything I can to like protect. And my dad was like, well, you can't keep your kids in a bubble. And I'm like, but I can control what comes into my home and the rules that I have here. Long story short, I told him, to go to hell. That was like the last words that I said to my father. And there went the no contact. And because my mom was a passive enabler, it was like, well, if you're not talking to my dad, your father, then I can't see you either. And that's kind of how it went.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. That's crazy to have such a physical proof of why you need to protect your kid because a lot of situations are not like that. It's not physical, it's it's mental and emotional. And one thing that's a little bit different in my parents' situation is that once we all started breaking away from my dad, and listeners, I write a little bit about this in my first book, The Accountability Code. Page 59, standing up. That's the story. Because I used to tell people, page 59 will shock you. Because it's a story where I spoke up to my dad about all of his abuse. And when we started cutting off my dad one by one, there's 8 kids in my family. It wasn't until we told my mom, if you're going to back him up, we're not going to deal with you either. And that hurt her enough that she started making changes. And it's so crazy to just think that people will continue to hurt even though you have told them this is hurting me. Such a big deal. Okay, so psychology, how do you deal with the idea of like my family's crazy, but I promise you I'm kind of normal. Like I'm not crazy like that because if you were like your family, there would be no need for separation, but you see that there's things about you and the way you want to live your life that you're like, it just doesn't fit in to continue interacting with people who are so unhealthy. So, what was it that you learned about yourself that you're like, I got a good head on my shoulders and I'm not crazy for doing this?
Well, I never promised that I was normal or not crazy. I think my crazy is just a different kind of crazy. But no, I think when I tell people, my story and the biggest takeaway is, again, like how do you explain that to your children? How do you live your life? And, particularly like I'm Puerto Rican and in our culture, it's always blood is thicker than water. Like you said, that's your father. Like you have to. And I'm like, no, I really don't have to. Like I have a choice.
Mhm.
And it definitely is, it's hard, it's messy, and I'm not perfect at it. I don't have all the answers. I don't pretend to. Like there were cycles where it was back and forth. There's definitely guilt, there's definitely regret, and it's something that is a lifelong process. Like it's never going to be okay. Like I would never tell somebody you're going to be okay and whole 100% because you're not. There's always going to be a hole there. There's always going to be a shoulda, coulda, woulda. What if things had been different? What if he had just said, okay, fine. I will stop, smoking cigarettes. Like, would that have been enough? Probably not. But that was just like the one little thing that, set me off because it's like, okay, you can abuse me as much as you want to because I'm used to it. I grew up with it, whatever. But when it starts to affect my kids and my kids start asking those types of questions, like for me, that was my line in the sand. Like, no, we're not going there. We're not doing this. And that's kind of why I chose the niche that I did because, children are really powerful why onto why you would make some
Mhm.
change in your life. Like you just said with your mom, like when you confronted your mom and your siblings did, then she was like, oh, like I really do need to do something. Unfortunately, in my case, with my siblings, there's only 3 of us. That was not the situation, with my mom. And it ultimately cost her her life. And that could probably be a whole other podcast. But yeah, it was my mom did pass during the no contact phase. So that was really rough too.
I'm sorry to hear that. I think that when we go through things like this, it gives us such a clear why of how important it is to stick to our choices. And I remember just how often it was that I would come home from my parents' house in tears. Like, I just wanted to help. I wanted to be a good daughter. I wanted to be there to support my dad when he would ask me for help. And I just came home in tears because it was just another argument. He would want your help, but he did not care about you. He wanted you to come over and do what he needed fixed. And you'd say, "Hey, how about we do it this way?" And no, like we're talking like he would not throw away expired food, like 5 years expired food. No, it's still good. It was only a quarter, and I just was like, what am I what am I doing? I don't think I can live this way. And it was taking a toll on my own family that I just was like, I'm in a tailspin for 2 or 3 days after every interaction, and I just can't do this. So tell me, when you get started with women, what's the reason that they are like, I'm ready to hire a coach to help me with this? What sort of things are happening in their life that they finally take action in a big way?
Yeah, I would say for a lot of women, they've probably, I mean, I know I spent years in therapy and having a psychology degree, I absolutely say therapy is a first line of defense for sure. And even coaching in conjunction with therapy would be amazing. But therapy is not enough because, you'll go once a week, but you need somebody to really hold your hand through this process. And it's really sitting down. And I always tell people, you need to write a list of pros and cons. Go old school, like one side of the paper. Here's all the reasons why I should or I shouldn't. And there's different levels of, I went completely no contact. Maybe no contact is not for everybody. Maybe it's setting very firm boundaries. Maybe it's okay, I'll talk to you on this day of the week. This is what we're going to talk about. Maybe it's blocking them on social media. I think it's very personal and very specific to everybody what their needs will be. I would never say it's a one size fits all thing because everybody's journey is different. I mean, I know mine was.
Yeah, that's very smart. I think too, there were times where I would still have the door open for my dad, but I had to get used to saying, I don't have enough emotional bandwidth to discuss this with you. Or there was a time that I called, and I actually took this to therapy too, because I called my dad and I talked to him for 8 minutes straight. I did not stop talking because I knew that once he started talking, he was going to start yelling at me. So I was just trying to get an update on my life and the kids. And when's the last time you talked to your mother? Well, I don't know, but I was doing this the other day. And I just thought, I asked my therapist, I was like, why do you think I did that? And it was just a really interesting conversation because just like you said, there's going to be a different pathway to peace and health in everybody's life. And what would you say learning about the accountability code stuck out to you that you're like, this makes a lot of sense in helping people follow through?
I think for me, it was the reflection piece. I am constantly reflecting on my choices, reflecting on how I approach situations, and even my own triggers. Like, I can't sit here and say, like, I'm healed. I'm this total warrior that can do all the things. I actually had a situation a couple weeks ago where I was in a situation and I was triggered by somebody who had a lot of the same mannerisms as my father. And for the life of me, I could not figure out why did I lose control when I was talking to this one individual. And
Mm.
when I went back home and I was talking to my husband about it and we were just like role playing it out, and I'm like, he reminded me so much of my father. And it made so much sense. Like, so I'm still constantly having to go back and like reassess. And, there's still going to be those sore points. And, it's been 6 years and it was like it was yesterday when I was talking to this one individual. And those are like the little minefields that I think we all need to be mindful of and constantly reflecting on the choices that we've made and be prepared for.
Yeah, I love that. I have definitely found similar experiences where I have more quickly recognized who I need to reduce contact with because it brings out the same behaviors in me or thought processes. And I think that's so powerful because if you learn it once with one individual, you can take those same skills and apply them to other parts of your life in communication. So, in your process, when you work with women, what are some of the things that people can expect to do that's different than therapy? Because I love your definition of that. Like they go hand in hand, but they are different. They are very different. So, what experiences or exercises can women expect to do when they work with you?
Definitely, reflection is huge because I found it beneficial for me. I think everyone needs to reflect. I think journaling, and it's funny because I actually hate journaling,
Hmm?
but I've gotten used to not like the whole, I'm going to keep my little diary, but I think writing it out on paper, whether you need to burn that paper, whether you need to like look back to remind you of like what it is and why you're doing it, and crafting your why statement, writing out that list of pros and cons, having that tangible checklist of things that you're going through. I also help women create a boundaries like playlist, like, okay, if they do this, you're going to do this. And having a whole plan, I think, makes it so much easier than acting out in the heat of the moment. Because if you go into these situations unstructured, it's going to take you out of your comfort zone and into a place that you don't want to go every single time.
And I think too, if it's not addressed properly, you are definitely going to turn into another version of those bad behaviors. And after I, kind of cut off contact with my dad, I realized that I also had to set some boundaries with my mom. And that was actually really hard for me because I have four daughters and I didn't ever want to have these reasons why I didn't want to talk to my mom because deep down I was like, I don't want my daughters to have these same reasons that they don't talk to me. But then the real belief is like, okay, well then check your behavior, check how you communicate, make sure that you're checking in for the right reasons and things like that. So I've been grateful to have those examples of like what not to do and what to do, but you have to like actively pursue good examples and good behaviors because if they were not taught to you and they're not consistently modeled, it's very difficult to create something different for your children than you had. So, in your own marriage, like how are things different? Did your husband understand all of your reasons or was there a little bit of pushback or how is it with in-laws? Like tell me more about the dynamic with that because those play into everything. There were times where my husband was like, he's your dad, don't cut him off. And I was like, I do not need to hear this from you too.
Yeah, no, that also could be another podcast for sure. But my husband and I are both Puerto Rican, and quite frankly, I think he also has some of those generational things going on. I have to work very, very hard not to point it out to him because he's not ready. Like he's not at a place where he's willing to acknowledge it, accept it. When it does affect our children, however, I do draw a very hard line in the sand. One thing that I can talk about is, his father has a tendency of just, and it's I don't know if it's an older Spanish people thing, but like one of the first things he would say would be like, "Oh, you've gained weight or you've lost weight," or that's like how he would greet you. And my daughter, she was going through puberty, she broke out really bad, and like one of the first things that he said to her was like, "Oh, your face looks really awful." That was I told my husband, I'm like, "You have 5 minutes to address this, or I'm going to throw your father out of my house." So we've had some tense moments, but as far as like he was supportive with me cutting off contact because even when we were dating, it was like, yeah, something's not right there. And he saw how upset I would be. Just like you said, like after every contact, every conversation, we would have them over and it would be a big to do. So he was more than happy enough to let me cut off contact. I think the hardest part, that we really struggled through was my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's right around the time that I went no contact. It was brutal for my family, and it was something that we were just constantly working through. And my siblings and I, and my grandmother, my mother's mom is still alive. So it was definitely a challenge. And it was definitely a challenge in our marriage. Our marriage, we went through some stuff. But I think in a marriage, if you can go through those really hard things together and come out on the other side, you could say, hey, we went through it, we did it, we came out stronger for it. And again, like you said, it's modeling that behavior for your children. So they now see a whole new way of living and how they should be. And part about what I talk about in my course is, like you said, you didn't have those positive role models. So you are reparenting yourself so that you can be a better parent, so that you don't pass on those same cycles, which is the whole goal.
Hey, my beautiful people. The message of waking up and showing up is yours for the taking. In fact, it's completely free. All you got to do is take this quick action. I've recorded my entire audiobook and I'd love for you to consume it between episodes. Head to marcybarker.com to get instant access to the accountability code Wake Up and Show Up. Yeah, I like that. I like that you repeated that too, because reparenting yourselves, I think that takes intention. It's a lot of work, but it is so rewarding. I think, my oldest is 16 and when she's like, I'm surprised at how much my friends keep from their parents. Like, I talk to you about everything and it's just surprising that people are so secretive. And I count my blessings for that because I want that to be a safe place. But I also don't expect her to be like that forever. I think that that's something I have to be okay with and maintain as best as I can. But I think that reparenting is kind of a new concept for people because you do have to kind of go into some deep places. what would you say is a good intro for that? Like, if somebody's hearing that for the very first time, like, what does it mean to reparent myself? What exactly does that mean? Can you explain it?
I think the simple, short, sweet way is just treating yourself the way you wish you had been treated, or parenting yourself the way you wish. What did you need when you were growing up, depending on whatever your situation was? Because, even the way I have four kids, so I parent them all very, very differently. But it's like, okay, find yourself in a place and say, what would you need? What would you have needed? And then now that you've reparented yourself and you've given yourself that permission to say, okay, it's okay to be this way. Now, how do I do the same thing for my children? That's kind of been my framework in a nutshell. And
Mhm.
because my kids, I have a really crazy age gap with my kids. So I have a 21-year-old, a 13-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 3-year-old. And I didn't start doing the really heavy work until I went no contact, with my parents. So by that time, my oldest was already 15. So he was parented very, very differently than what
Mm.
my younger ones were. And I basically have my own walking, talking, living, breathing psychological experiment with my four kids. Actually, he tells me all the time, he's like, I was just a test baby. That's why I'm so messed up. But but in a degree, like we joke about it, but it is true because I was very young when I had him. It was raw. He was around for like a lot of the raw things that happened. And he turned out so much differently than, my 13-year-old. And he's a boy too, and boys are just so much harder. I don't care what anybody says. But I will take my girls all day, every day over my boys. But yeah, like even, from a nerdy psychological perspective, just seeing how it's played out, with my own kids and even my own siblings. Like I'm the oldest daughter of three, so I have the eldest daughter syndrome down pretty well. My middle sister, who definitely suffers from middle child syndrome, and she uses that as a badge of honor all the time. She reacted to the trauma of our childhood by literally moving across the country. And she like barely visits home anymore. Like for her, she needs to not be physically in the same area where all the trauma occurred. Like that's how she has coped. And my brother, he was messed up by our childhood in a totally different way. Because my father would tell us girls, go to college or marry well because I'm not helping you, like you're on your own.
Mhm.
Surprise, surprise, both me and my sister have a college degree. My brother does not, So he's living a very different life where he is right now, and he suffered in his own way too. So when you start looking at these generational things, you can kind of see how these patterns, if I look back at my grandparents, I look at my siblings, I look at my kids, and it's like that for me is motivation enough to do what I do because, hurt people and hurt
Mhm.
parents parent children who wind up, on a therapist's couch 20 years later. And that literally has been my mission in life. Like I told my husband when we were dating and we started talking about having kids, I already had one child when I met my husband. But I said, my goal in life, my only goal is to raise children who don't have to talk to a therapist in 20 years because of something I did. And if I can do that, then I'm successful.
Mm. Yeah, I like that little disclaimer at the end. If it's something you did.
Like
We
if
literally can't control anything else, but we 100% must control ourselves. And one thing I really like too is that I think you and I get along very well because it is the no nonsense approach. It's like, let's not, there's an elephant in the room and we're going to tackle it right now. We're actually going to obliterate it. We're going to make sure that it doesn't exist in the next hour. And I think that that's really important. So, I'm really grateful for people like you who not just help other people, but you're living it and you're setting an example. And kind of coming back to the beginning of our conversation, when you were talking about, oh, these things that happen in my home, that's not normal. And I think that happens to so many people when they begin to talk about their experiences. And I was the same way. I had no idea how horrible some of the things my dad did until I told somebody and their jaws would drop. And I was like, oh, and I talk about this in that podcast episode with my sister because she's the oldest. I'm child number 6. So we had a totally different experience. And I didn't realize how important my message would be for other women who needed help. So, how would you say in your messaging do you softly, I guess, kind of get the attention of people who need you? Or is it like really bold that people need to know, like, this is a big thing that you can do for your happiness? Tell me how you approach the subject with newbies.
Newbies. It's super hard. And I definitely am not, I try not to soften it because honestly, it's such an important thing. But I like to tap into just sharing my story, quite honestly. It's like, this is where I was, this is what I did, and this is the outcome that I had. And for me, my main core, my message, particularly for moms, is maybe you're okay with what you went through and dealing with it. But really, we have an obligation as parents to do better for the next generation. And I really don't think there's really no softening that to me. Like
Mm.
we if we chose to bring children into this world, we have an obligation to do better. And, full stop. I mean, I kind of think that's how it is. And it's definitely have some grace and have some compassion for yourself because you didn't know better growing up. Like you said, there were things that happened in your house that, you thought were just normal. Like I thought it was normal that everybody else's moms like had to lay out their dad's clothes for them and wait on them hand and foot and eat last and not speak and just go along with the flow. Like I thought that was normal. And then I went to dinner at somebody else's house and I saw a mom raise a voice to a dad, and here I am waiting for like the plates to fly. And I'm like, oh no, it didn't happen here. And I'm like, what? And, what was super funny growing up for me, I grew up in a time when like, your parents were allowed to like bring you lunch at school. So my dad, being the narcissist that he is, he would like show up to my school with like McDonald's. And everybody's like, "Oh my God, your dad is so cool and he's so awesome." And I'm like, "Yeah, you don't have to live with him." But as a child, you don't want to say, "No, it's really not like that." So you just kind of take that in and you're like, "Oh yeah, my dad's really awesome." And it just reinforces that, is it him or is it me? Like everybody else thinks he's awesome, so why don't I think he's awesome? So it took a lot of work for me to repair that. And then people would look at my mom because she also had RBF like me. They're like, "Oh, your mom is so mean." And I'm like, "No, dude, it's something, So people look at me and they're like, I've literally had people tell me like, until I talk to you, like I never would have approached you because you look so mean. And I'm like, no, it's my face. Like, I'm sorry, it's my face. And I've cursed one of my daughters with the same face. So if she's listening to this, I apologize, but she knows the drill. She gets it. It's our running joke.
Uh, That's funny. I remember I made a post about one of my experiences growing up, and my childhood neighbor, who, we grew up together, she messaged me and she said, I always thought it was so odd that for dinner, when I came over, everybody had top ramen and your dad was the only one eating steak. And I was like, that was normal because steak was expensive. We maybe would get a bite, but every single meal, my dad sat at his place at the table, and all the food had to start at his end of the table. And we maybe saw him clean a dish one time in his life, and it's just so interesting because when you realize life is so much more than that, then you have really deep relationships with people who mutually care about each other. And for anybody listening to this and you're like, this is hitting you because we're saying things that nobody has ever said that they're experiencing. I think you have to know that your experiences are valid and there's so much beauty on the other side of the work to do that. So I really like that you say, I'm Becky the cycle breaker. And what would you say was or continues to show up as one of the most important cycles that you've broken?
Oh goodness, there's so many. I think just for me, like what is possible? Like the limiting beliefs that I carried from childhood, even after I went no contact, even after I did all the intensive work, it's like, can I do this? Can I do this? And still that voice is in the back of my head, like, can I do this? And thankfully, I've broken that cycle with my children. If they come up to me and say, "Hey, I want to try this," I'm like, "Dude, go ahead, go for it." When I started showing up online as my authentic self, I'm like, "Can I do this?" And it's like, "Yeah, I can do this." And it's setting a bar, meeting a goal, and then say, "Okay, what's the next thing?" And I think that's the most important cycle that I broke for myself, because if not, I wouldn't be here doing this work. Because it's like when I first had this concept of coaching women, I'm like, nah, like I'm not in a place, I'm not in a mental, like I went back to my therapist and I'm like, look, like this is what I'm thinking about doing. Like, am I crazy? And he's like, why would you say that? I'm like, I don't know, because I'm still sitting here talking to you and I want to go out and help other people. And he's like, you're probably the best, like you could help them more than I could because you've actually been through it. And I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah.
I love that. I remember the day that I had therapy, and my therapist was like, Marcy, you've done so much in your life. You change people's lives, you help people. She said, I'm a big fan of you. I'm a big fan of yours. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay. And another time, it had been a couple of months since I had talked to her, and she texted me and said, hey, just want to know how you're doing. How did the move go? How is this? And I was like, shouldn't you be paying me now if you're asking me? If you want to talk to me, you got to pay me now. And I think it's just those moments where you do experience this level of peace or happiness where you're like, wow, I enjoy my life. I enjoy my relationships. And there's also that ability to give yourself credit because nobody ever gave you credit. Nobody ever gave you credit because they're in their own world, living by their own rules, and their world only makes sense when people follow along. So I'm going to ask you about a couple of resources that you would recommend or stuff in your own program. But when I was going through this, and of course, I'm just like you, where I'm like, I still got stuff to deal with because, my mom got remarried and I could not show up to her wedding on Zoom. It was Zoom. She sent me a Zoom link and it was all very fast. And I felt like because my mom had moved on much quicker than she said she was going to, I felt like there was a window for her and I to connect that was shortened big time because she had moved on with another partner. And I told my husband, I was like, I'm not getting on Zoom. Like, I cannot bring this energy to her wedding. And I left my phone at home, and Aubrey and I went out on a date, and I just kind of put it behind me. But I did have to get over that feeling of like, I didn't go to my mom's wedding. Like, that's super crazy. But in the grand scheme of things, nobody cares. Did she ever ask me why I didn't show up? No, she doesn't care. She didn't care. It literally doesn't matter. So I think that in making changes, there's definitely going to be that ride up and down. But therapy has helped me. Talking to coaches like you definitely helps me. I've read a few books that I absolutely love. But what resources do you have available, or do you recommend to people? And of course, you have a freebie that you can give people too. So tell us about all the places that we can get started.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do have my kind of no contact checklist that I have people, go through to kind of check off, to really take a pulse on, is this something you're ready for? Because I think if it's something that you go through unprepared for the emotions, and you might really literally be digging up unhealed trauma. I mean, that's what the biggest thing was for me too. Like I had gone to therapy in my early 20s and thought I was good. Okay, fine. And then my 30s hit and I started doing this internal work. Like I read a lot of books. I love Brene Brown, did all that stuff. I had gotten my psychology degree. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm all good. And then as I started doing the internal work, memories that
Mhm.
I thought, I was like, oh, this actually happened. And then in talking to my siblings who didn't remember things because I'm older and comparing stories. So definitely, I am a huge advocate of doing your research and doing your due diligence before you embark on something this life-changing. So definitely therapy, the no contact checklist. I am happy to sit and have a call with anybody. If you think, like some people even question, like, was my childhood really that bad? Well, let's sit down and talk about it. Like, let's hash it out. Because I think when I hate using cliches, but when you speak truth to something that happened and you stand up for it, it makes it real, it makes it tangible. And I think sometimes those difficult conversations just need to be had. I know one book that was super transformative for me that I read recently before I decided to embark on this journey of coaching was Jamie Kern Lima's Worthy.
Mhm.
And I am not a self-help book person. I am a psychological thriller person. That's my guilty escape from my own brain. I know it's a little odd, but that's what I do. I like other people's drama to escape my own drama. I'll talk to my therapist about that one.
Yeah.
But, the whole concept of, yes, you are worthy of this, and being told no so many times, maybe you were being told no because, it wasn't the universe's or God's or whatever's time for you to embark on that journey. And that resonated with me. So that would be a book that I would recommend to anyone, because you are worthy of investing in yourself, taking the time. And that's pretty much all I would say on that one.
Perfect. Where can people find you if they want to have a conversation with you or get details on your courses and your resources?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of my content lives on Instagram. So my IG handle is Becky the Cycle Breaker. Website is of the same name, beckythecyclebreaker.com. See, I'm making it really easy to for everyone to find me. Um, I am working on a YouTube channel, so hopefully by the time this episode airs, I will have my YouTube channel. It'll probably be the same name, just going to keep it consistent. And my DMs are always open. Like, I am, again, happy to sit down and just talk. Like, if you need to vent, if you need to cuss, scream into the abyss, I'm a huge proponent of, whatever it takes to do what you need to do. So,
Yes, I love that. I 100% recommend you and agree. And I think that the work that you're doing is so important. And even though you and I have had very similar experiences, I can't think of a better person to help people through, because I want to say my journey took a little bit longer because I didn't have anybody that was like super bold to help me through it. Little did I know my experience really helped my other siblings take action. So you guys skip all the fluffy stuff. Like, go right to Becky to not just take action, but to make sure it's the right action. Because that's one thing that I really like about your message, is that we're not just like happy go lucky, stop talking to everybody who pisses you off. Like, that is not what it's about at all. And Becky, I really love how you help people sift through in a very logical way what the next step is, because that's important for our own health and wellness. And I love that. And just the fact that you have a whole degree in psychology, like, that just makes it even more safe, I guess I would say. So I think you're awesome.
Oh, well, thank you, Marcy. I think you're awesome too. So, I mean, that's why we work together. So,
Yeah. All right, everybody, check out all of the information in the show notes, and definitely go check out her Instagram, Becky the Cycle Breaker. I almost thought you said Psycho Breaker, and I was like, it's that too.
yeah, that too. We can go there too.
Yeah. All right, listeners, thank you so much for being here. We'll see you next week for another episode of Your Loving Kick in the Pants. Thank you for listening, friends. If you got value out of this episode, I would love for you to drop a review or share this with a friend. Let's be real. Let's spread the word, because we all know someone who could use your loving kick in the pants.